Alright, what's going on everyone, and welcome to the series in which I introduce you to all of the most powerful competitive decks in the modern format. The goal here is not to give exact deck lists as those change constantly, but rather to give a brief overview of how the deck works so you can be prepared if you're new to the format. Today we are looking at Gruul Eldrazi Ramp. Now it should be noted that there are actually currently two Gruul Eldrazi decks, which is kind of crazy. The one that we're not talking about today is the one that's built around the Basking Brood Scale combo. Perhaps we can talk about that in a future video. Today, we're talking about the ramp deck. So when you think of Odrazi in Modern, two sets of cards probably come to mind. First is the low curve aggro package played in the more aggressive builds, or Tron. Tron being used to ramp into huge Odrazi with just 3 lands. This deck plays neither of those. It instead relies on Eldrazi Temple and Ugin's Labyrinth. Temple is a classic, it just taps for 2 when casting Odrazi, but the Labyrinth is a newer card. It also taps for 2, but only if you exile a card with 7 or more mana when you play it. You can still play it and not exile something and just tap it for 1, but with this deck, you want to tap it for 2 and you just exile a big thing. And notably, you can get the big thing back eventually by tapping it, though if you do that, it will no longer have an imprint, so it'll go back to tapping for 1, but something you can do in the late game. Also note that Labyrinth just taps for 2. It doesn't require you to cast an Odrazi, so you can use it to cast spells or pay for abilities. So, you have 2 lands that, if you can play them consistently, effectively double your mana, right? On turn 3, you can have 6 mana if you had 3 of these, right? That's how that works, and that allows you to play huge Odrazi like Sire of the Seven Deaths, Devourer of Destiny, and Emrakul, the Promised End. The Sire is just a big idiot. 7 mana, 7/7, First Strike, Vigilance, Menace, Trample, Reach, Lifelink, and Ward. And the Ward is the reason to play this, because big stupid idiots get hit with removal spells, but this one forces the opponent to pay 7 life if they want to just kill it, so even if it just dies to removal, it still takes out a third of the opponent's life, so that's pretty good. Devourer is a 7 mana 6/6 that will exile a permanent when it enters. It has to be a color, but yeah, just exile something. 7 mana 6/6, kind of weak, but you know, a removal spell on top of it, and a deck that can get to this kind of mana pretty quick. It's not that bad, but the weird part about this, oh, it's an Odrazi, so it has a weird ability. If it's in your opening hand, you can reveal it. If you do, at the beginning of your first upkeep, you look at the top 4 cards, you put 1 back and the other 3 into exile. So this is great for consistency. If you see this in your opener, you know you get to dig 4 cards deep. That can help you hit your lands. If you're already full of lands, you can find a threat, right? Just consistency, man. And for free, no mana invested, just if it's in your opening hand, great. And also note that the ETB of exiling something, that's going to be very relevant. We'll talk more about that in a second. But first, Emrakul, it's just massive. 13 mana, 13/13, flying, trample, protection from instants. It'll cost 1 less for each card type in your graveyard, making it easier to cast. And when you cast it, you take control of the opponent for their turn. They'll get an extra turn, but you can wreak a lot of havoc doing that, of course, so that's fine. Now, I want to talk more about Devourer's ability to exile something when it enters. This is very common in this deck because it also plays Sowing Mycospawn and Worldbreaker. The Mycospawn is a 4 mana 3/3 that when it enters, searches your library for a land and puts it onto the battlefield. Some important notes here: it does not say basic, so you can search for Odrazi Temple and Ugin's Labyrinth, and the land does not enter tapped, so you can use it immediately. It also has kicker. If you pay 2 for the kicker, you get to exile a land. Now 6 might seem like a lot, but with the Odrazi lands, you can do this as early as turn 3, and that sort of tempo swing is kind of crazy, right? Destroy your opponent's land and also search for your own that can tap for 2. That is a massive mana advantage that you get out of nowhere, and you get the 3/3 on top of it, which is totally fine. And then Worldbreaker is a 7 mana 6/7 that when you cast it can exile an artifact, enchantment, or a land. So these two, Mycospawn and Worldbreaker, are kind of scary at just denying the opponent mana, right? You can play Mycospawn, exile a land. You can play Worldbreaker, exile a land. You can play Devour and exile a threat. These cards, all 3 of these, are really good at just creating tempo swings. That's a major aspect of this deck, is it's slow to get started, but in the mid game, it starts deploying really big threats while also answering the opponents. So it goes from being behind to being ahead really fast and really suddenly. Worldbreaker also has the ability to sacrifice a land to return itself from the graveyard to your hand. This is great in the late game when you have excess lands. Suddenly you have a threat that you can bring back from the graveyard, but this drawback can also be negated with Ice Till Explorer. It's a 4 mana 2/4 that lets you play an additional land per turn, which is fine, and it also lets you play lands from the graveyard. So you can sacrifice a land to Worldbreaker, then just replay it with the Explorer. It will also mill a card every time you play a land, which will put more lands in the graveyard to play. It also puts more card types in the graveyard for Emrakul, so that's important. It's also really good with fetch lands in Ghost Quarter. Fetch lands can just sacrifice, find a land, then be replayed, and then re-sacrifice to find another land, so on and so forth. Ghost Quarter, another way to deny the opponent's mana. You can punish people who have greedy mana bases by just continuously killing their lands, then replaying the Ghost Quarter. So now you see Myco Spawn, Worldbreaker, and Ghost Quarter, all of which can destroy lands, and the Ice Till Explorer can let you replay Ghost Quarter over and over again. So this deck is really good at attacking your mana, that's for sure. And then for spells, the deck plays Malevolent Rumble, Kozilek's Return, and Kozilek's Command. The first digs 4 cards deep for a permanent, so that's fine. It also makes an Odrazi Spawn, which can be sacrificed for mana, very relevant in this deck. Kozilek's Return is a mini board wipe, not very good at first. 3 mana, deal 2 damage to all creatures. Now do note, you could potentially do that on turn 2 with the help of an Ugin's Labyrinth, but it's kind of mid. However, the upside is when it's in your graveyard, you can exile it for free, 0 mana. You can just exile it whenever you cast a creature with mana value 7 or greater to deal 5 damage to each creature. And that one is free, no mana invested at all. So once again, major tempo swing. If you can play like a Devourer and then exile a Kozilek's Command for 0 mana and deal 5 damage to everything, and use the Devourer to exile their bigger permanent that might survive the 5 damage. Tempo swing, big tempo swing. It goes from looking like it's behind to suddenly your board's gone, I have a big thing. That's what the deck does. And then the command costs X and 2, and you get to choose 2 modes from among 4. Make X Eldrazi spawns, scry X and draw, exile a creature, cost X or less, or exile X cards from a graveyard. Lots of utility here. You can play it early, like really early, like for 4 or 5 mana, to exile a small threat and just make a couple Odrazi to ramp into something bigger, or you can play it in the late game to dig super deep for a finisher, right? Also note that it's an Odrazi, so Eldrazi Temple will be able to tap for 2 for it. And yeah, digging for a finisher is relevant because one of those finishers is Ugin. Kind of a finisher, it's kind of complicated, but it is 7 mana for 7 loyalty, which is a ludicrous amount of damage required to deal with this thing if you're trying to attack it with creatures. When you cast it, you get to exile a permanent that's 1 or more colors. That's when you cast it, you just get to do that, which again, as we've seen a lot with this deck, tempo swing. Deploying a massive planeswalker while also exiling one of your opponent's permanents. Big tempo swing there. And then whenever you cast any colorless spell, you get to exile something, again with 1 or more colors. So once again, tempo. Playing this, exiling something, then playing Devour, exiling 2 things, and now you have a 7 mana planeswalker and a big creature on the battlefield. That's what this deck does. I wouldn't call it a tempo deck. It's a stompy deck that creates tempo swings. And then for the loyalty abilities, we're just talking about static ones so far. You can +2 to gain 2 life draw, totally fine. It puts it right to 9 loyalty right from the start. 0 will add 3 colorless mana, so if you need to cast like an Emrakul, that can help. And then you can -11 to search your library for any number of colorless non-land cards and put them all straight onto the battlefield. You basically just put everything in your library into the battlefield, and that's pretty crazy. Mostly though, Ugin is just a board disruptor. The abilities are nice, the draw is nice, the mana is nice, but generally this is just exile, deal with the board disruptor, board control. That's what he does. There's also Talisman of Impulse and Utopia Sprawl, which are always played in this deck. They provide an enchantment and an artifact for Emrakul, right, for the card types, and they also just help you ramp, right? We care about ramping. We're playing 6-7 mana spells, so ramp is good. Formidable Speaker, also noteworthy. This is a 3 mana 2/4 that when it enters lets you discard to search your library for any creature, put it into your hand, so you can discard excess lands or excess ramp spells to get gas. In the early game, maybe you discard a big Emrakul to get lower cost things if you need it, right? Whatever you need. What's interesting in this deck though is you can pay 1 mana, tap it, and untap another permanent, which actually ramps you in this deck, because you can like say tap a Labyrinth for 2 mana, then spend 1 of it to tap the speaker, untap the land, then tap it for another 2, so you get +1 mana, right? That's kind of fun. And that's really just the deck, guys. The deck is just, it's kind of interesting. It's much truer to the original intention of Eldrazi. When they were first released, they were supposed to be giant monsters that came out ahead of curve thanks to the fast mana, but unfortunately the low cost Eldrazi that released with Oath of the Gatewatch kind of turned them into an aggro tribe. Most people I think associate Eldrazi nowadays, at least in competitive play, with aggro, at least they used to in modern, because of Oath both of the Gatewatch, but this is very on brand for Eldrazi. You're just using lands to cast big things, and also the land destruction also quite flavorful if you know Eldrazi and the story. The fact that they're just devouring lands kind of makes sense. And yeah, it's just a ramp deck that ramps into big things and creates these pretty massive and terrifying tempo swings in the mid to late game by deploying big threats while also destroying the opponents at the same time. There is of course tons of variation from deck to deck. There's cards we didn't talk about that are sometimes played in these, and new sets are released, the metagame will develop, decks will evolve, and new cards will be released. So be sure to check the description below. I will leave links to metagame tracking websites so you can see the most up-to-date deck list at the time that you're watching this. So definitely look into those if you're interested in the most up-to-date build of this deck. But in the meantime, I hope this video was useful and interesting. Hit the like button if you liked the video, and I will see you in the next one.